Hello, everyone. Um, so I was asked to do an informal mini lecture about currently available vaccines on COVID para kahit daw pa paano mabigyan ng medyo science-based na impormasyon ang karamihan sa inyo na interesado magpabakuna or maybe nagde-decide pa lang kung magpapabakuna or hindi kaya naman running na sa COVID bakuna dahil sa mga nakukuhang chismis online. Just to be clear, I am not here to tell you whether magpabakuna or not or kung anong bakuna ang kukunin. But hopefully, I can give you factual updates and perhaps a little dose of reality sa kung anong sitwasyon meron tayo ngayon that will help you decide for yourself. Now, I already did a similar mini lecture last third weekend of January, I think. But since meron na namang additional updates, I decided to make some changes on my previous presentation. So essentially, this will be a more updated, comprehensive, and simpler version. But if you need details regarding specific vaccines, I suggest that you also check out the original video kasi merong ibang detalye doon na hindi ko include dito and meron ding updates dito na wala doon sa iba't ibang bakuna. So this is version 2.0 of COVID vaccine updates. Let's begin. So some of you are probably familiar with the concept of protective immunity by now. Yung reason kung bakit in many cases hindi ka na madaling mahawaan ng isang mikrobyo agad pag nagkasakit ka na dati pa with that parehong mikrobyo. Like sa case ng chickenpox or yung bulutong, you normally only get it once. Kasi after that, meron ka ng tinatawag na protective immunity. So kahit expose mo pa ulit yung sarili mo sa taong may bulutong, pag meron ka ng pag nagkabulutong ka na before, chances are hindi ka na mahahawa. And that's the concept and that's because you have protective immunity. So when a person gets infected with a pathogen like a virus, meron tayong tinatawag na immune system na siyang pangdepensa ng katawan against those mikrobyo na nare-recognize nila as foreign or hindi natural na part ng katawan. So when the immune response kicks in, outcome of the disease essentially becomes a race between the virus and the host immune response. Pag si virus ang nanalo, then malamang death or di kaya matinding pagkakasakit yung ending mo. Pag ang immune system naman yung nagwagi, then makaka-recover yung tao. And usually, kasabay ng recovery na yon ang pagkakaroon ng imprint ng previous karanasan ng immune system against that specific virus. So, next time na makita niya yung same na virus na yon, maaalala niya agad ito and magiging mas mabilis and mas effective na ang kanyang response. And basically, yan ang konsepto ng protective immunity, which is made possible dahil yung adaptive arm ng ating immune system ay merong tinatawag na quote-unquote memory. This is actually a quite complicated process involving a lot of players ng innate and adaptive immune system, including the B cells na siyang responsible for the production of antibodies. And normally, we associate protective immunity with the development of antibodies specific to that virus, which actually also plays a big role in protective immunity against many viruses, particularly antibodies that are able to neutralize the virus and yung nakakapag-inhibit ng virus from infecting the cells. But just know na in addition to antibodies, marami pa actually ibang components ang memory response, such as the cytotoxic T cells and the memory B cells. But those cytotoxic T cells can actually kill the virus-infected cells once recognized. But I guess for our purpose today, we don't really have to go into the details. Just know na maraming players ang protective immunity ng katawan natin. Hindi lang siya B cells, but we will focus mostly on B cells para lang mas madali yung discussion. Okay? So, paano naman yung papasok yung vaccination dito? Vaccination is essentially a strategy that mimics a natural infection para ma-trigger ang immune response and eventually maka-acquire ng protective immunity yung isang tao, except that instead of a live harmful pathogen, you use a harmless or a significantly attenuated or mas pinahinang version of that pathogen or di kaya yung component ng pathogen na yon. In other words, yung goal ng vaccination ay makapag-develop ng protective immunity ng katawan without the hassle ng pagkakasakit. So, there are many ways to develop a vaccine. With the pandemic that we are going through right now, different labs have actually used all possible vaccine strategies to see kung ano yung pinaka mag-work best against SARS-CoV-2. And this is a table summarizing the different vaccine designs. I don't have time to discuss each of these in detail, pero kung interesado kayo, you can always just, I guess, check the recording. But basically, you can classify these vaccine approaches into the traditional vaccines, yung mga conventional design ng bakuna, since vaccine was developed by Jenner in the 1800s and are comprised of whole viruses that are either killed or weakened, yung live attenuated vaccine. With the advances in molecular biology and biotechnology, nagkaroon ng mga new generation of vaccines, except for the viral vector vaccines. These novel approaches usually do not need the delivery or the administration of the whole virus anymore. So, meaning less chance na magkaroon ng infection after vaccination kasi portion na lang ng virus yung isasaksak sa tao as its vaccine target. And usually, the vaccine target serving as the antigen na siyang gagawan ng antibodies eventually ng ating immune system, it's usually the most exposed protein on a virus's surface, which in the case of SARS-CoV-2 is the viral glycoprotein right here, yung mga pula na protruding proteins in this cartoon, which forms a crown-like structure sa virion, hence the name coronavirus. So anyway, the vaccine containing either the killed or weakened portion of the virus or a major structural component of the virus is injected into the body, and this introduction of a foreign molecule, foreign sa perspective ng immune system natin, will trigger an immune response and eventually in the production of antibodies and the generation of memory. In some cases, the vaccine itself does not trigger a strong immune response, and in such cases, an adjuvant is usually added, which is a substance that has a potent immunostimulatory properties, kaya nabuboost ang immune responses for better chances of developing protective immunity. I don't really want to talk about adjuvants for this lecture, except that these adjuvants can cause allergic reactions to some individuals, and therefore, one should be aware kung meron and kung anong adjuvant ang gagamitin sa bakuna para pwede mong ma-double check kung meron kang potential allergy against that specific adjuvant. Yun lang talaga yung purpose ko ng because these are technical terms and honestly, you don't really need to know about it, except that yung practical application on why you need to understand na merong adjuvant ang ibang bakuna. Some do, some does, some vaccine wala. Yun lang. Okay, so dahil sa shortage ng COVID bakuna ngayon, you probably have heard or read experts discussing the possibility of just doing the single shot or maybe delaying the booster shot para kahit papano mas maraming tao ang mako-cover ng first shot ng bakuna. So this is a graph showing you a typical immune response to a vaccine. So after your first shot, you trigger, the vaccine triggers an immune response that generally involves recruitment of immune cells to the site of injection, leading to a local and sometimes even systemic response. And this is why you generally feel soreness or you develop fever following vaccination. This is a sign that your body actually responded to the vaccine. And this is a good thing because you want a good but temporary response, usually lasting up to 72 hours. So after your first immunization, you start to produce antibodies and develop some sort of a memory, but at a low to moderate level. And then with the booster shot, you trigger a faster and more efficient and higher level of adaptive response. So it's way better than your previous response to the first vaccination. And that is why generally booster shot of the vaccine is administered after a specific period to optimize your response to the vaccine antigen. Kasi normally, mas maayos ang response or mas bongga ang response pag merong booster shot. Now, there are cases when a single vaccine shot is good enough to protect the individual from subsequent infection. But in most cases, better kung meron na second or even third shot as a booster vaccination. So those booster shots are not just extra gastos, they are actually needed for you to acquire a better protective immunity. So yun lang. Okay, so kung perfect ang mundo and pwede tayong gumawa ng kahit anong bakuna against COVID with just a snap of a finger, or pwede tayong humiling sa isang genie, bigla-bigla lang, an ideal COVID-19 vaccine should be highly immunogenic or bonggang response ang kaya niyong ma-stimulate para mataas din ang protective immunity na madi-develop, preferably after isang turok lang or after isang dose lang ng shot. It should also be safe in the sense na yung pag-administer ng bakuna won't result in the development of COVID disease na siyang tinatry na nga nating i-prevent in the first place. It should also not be too reactogenic na magti-trigger siya ng autoimmune or hypersensitivity reactions. And it should also be easy to administer. Yung tipong mabilis lang yung pagbabakuna and walang masyadong special skills required para makapag-administer ng bakuna yung mga medical professional. And it should also have a simple storage requirements para walang masasayang na bakuna dahil lang napanis to. And this is especially important for countries like the Philippines. Okay, so tingnan natin isa-isa yung mga bakuna na meron tayo against COVID-19 so far. Starting with the traditional inactivated vaccines developed by Sinovac and Sinopharm, which are both vaccine companies from China. Inactivated vaccine comprises of a whole SARS-CoV-2 virus na pinatay by chemical treatment para hindi na siya harmful sa katawan. So take note, patay na siya. Hindi lang siya pinahina, it's dead. Then, dinagdagan ng alum as an adjuvant para nga, yun nga, yung adjuvant para mas ma-boost ang potency ng killed na virus sa pag-induce ng protective immunity. Actually, yung vaccine ng Sinovac at ng Sinopharm ay halos magkapareho lang except sa gamit na strain ng SARS-CoV-2. But I am assuming na both of these strains were isolated in the early stage of the pandemic sa China. And both actually also use the same adjuvant alum or aluminum hydroxide. Ewan ko kung meron magnesium to, but it's aluminum hydroxide. So you have to make sure that you don't have any allergy to alum kung eto yung choice mo ng vaccine. And traditional, this kind of vaccine design has been used for decades. And so more or less, meron na siyang magandang history in terms of safety nung vaccine design. I'm not talking about the vaccine itself, yung design lang. So the viruses were grown in viro cells, which I think is pretty safe. Hindi siya kagaya ng mga lumang flu vaccines na pinarami yung virus sa chicken eggs, and therefore minsan during production merong mga natitira na egg protein, so yung may mga allergy sa itlog nagkakaproblema sa flu vaccine. But I don't think this will be a problem with how the Sinovac and Sinopharm inactivated vaccines were produced. When it comes to efficacy, Sinopharm reported 79% protection against symptomatic COVID, which is quite okay. For Sinovac, protection range from 50.4 to 9.2, depending on which symptoms were included in the count. And kung saang country ginawa yung phase 3 trial, as well as kung ano ang risk level ng trial participants for SARS-CoV-2 infection. So for the 50.4 efficacy, this was reported in Brazil among healthcare workers. And the count also included very mild cases. Of course, kung healthcare workers yung trial participants, they have higher chances of exposure to SARS-CoV-2 due to the nature of their job. So I think we should also put that into consideration when we analyze data and try to decide kung anong vaccine yung best for us. Also, since these are healthcare workers nga, mas aware sila sa mga small changes sa symptoms ng katawan nila. So they counted even very mild cases na siguro if it's just a normal person, hindi na niya madidetect yon. So mas sensitive yung healthcare workers pagdating sa symptoms. So mas malaki yung chance na mas maraming makakount. But if it were just if they just counted mild to severe cases, not the very mild, I think the efficacy is about 78% with the same healthcare worker population in Brazil. It is also important to note that since the trial was conducted in Brazil, as you know, there are recent reports of the emergence of new variants with some ability to partially escape neutralizing antibodies against early variants. So all these factors could help explain the relatively low efficacy observed in that particular phase 3 trial in Brazil ng Sinovac. Sinovac also reported efficacy of 65.3% in Indonesia and 91.2% in Turkey. So more or less, the protection provided by both the inactivated vaccines appear to be moderate. So let's just say 78 and 79%. One problem though is based pa lang yung mga data na to sa press release ng vaccine companies ni na Sinovac and Sinopharm, which is not to say na kailangan pagdudahan na agad yung mga data nila. Baka kasi I think it's just under review pa lang yung paper, so I guess i-release din siya soon. But yung results ng phase 1 and 2 trials naman nila, they have been published in Lancet, so and it's a respected journal. So I guess there's really no cause for alarm. Pero kailangan din nating antayin yung publication ng interim clinical trial ng phase 3 nila para lang mas mabusisi natin yung details ng mga efficacy details and safety details ng mga bakuna na to. In addition to their home country, these inactivated vaccines from China have been granted approvals for emergency use in UAE and also in Indonesia for Sinovac. Philippine FDA, I believe, also recently approved Sinovac's application for late-stage trials sometime in mid-January, which means we will likely get access to this inactivated vaccine soon. And I know that some have this apprehension na kesyo ginagawa tayong guinea pigs sa trials. And honestly, while this is true, I would say that there is nothing inherently wrong with being clinical trial participants, especially at this late stage na kung saan meron ng enough data regarding its safety, at least in the short term, based on interim data nila from at least 15,000 individuals from at least 3 different countries na nauna na sa ating maging quote-unquote guinea pigs. So reality is there is a global shortage in COVID vaccine. And if being volunteer trial participants is one way for us to gain access to these vaccines, then I think that is something that we should consider, or at least our governments should at least consider, especially since may idea na rin naman tayo sa safety ng bakuna based sa information that we got from Brazil, Indonesia, and Turkey, and so far, medyo promising naman, or at least medyo safe naman. From traditional approaches using inactivated vaccines, let's go to one alternative strategy developed by experts decades ago, the subunit vaccines. So rather than introducing whole virus, which is either inactivated or attenuated sa mga traditional na bakuna, rather than inducing the whole virus to the immune system, a subunit vaccine only contains a fragment or a portion of the pathogen. In the case of SARS-CoV-2, it's the spike protein, yung yellow na to, na nagpo-protrude. Because, yun na nga, yung spike protein, yung target ng karamihan sa mga COVID bakuna natin ngayon, or at lahat actually, except for the traditional ones, spike protein yung pinaka-target nila because yun yung pinaka-exposed na portion ng virus sa surface. And one advantage of using just components of the pathogen and not the entire virus is that wala nang possibility na maging infectious pa yung bakuna. Kasi nga, hindi ito buong virus. Just in case, for example, kung halimbawa hindi maayos yung quality control ng inactivated vaccines and merong matira na buhay na virus dun sa vaccine preparation, then pwedeng ma-infect yung taong nabakunahan. But for subunit vaccines, as well as actually other new generation vaccines na hindi buong virus yung ginamit, walang possibility of accidental infection from vaccination. So hindi siya concerned for these kinds of vaccines. Now, this use of a single protein and not the entire virus containing several, so as you know, the entire virus contains several proteins, several structural proteins. Now, for this subunit, isa lang yung pinili, yun yung spike protein niya. But this this approach is not really a new strategy. In fact, yung first subunit vaccine was licensed for use in the US sometime in the 1980s. And this is the Hep B vaccine at that. Currently, Novavax has a promising subunit vaccine against COVID-19. And actually, the technology and design that they used for making this is a bit different from the old subunit vaccines in the 80s. But the concept is essentially the same. So here's an illustration on how the Novavax vaccine looks like. So meron nanoparticles studded with the coronavirus spike protein, itong mga green na to. Then merong honeycomb-like structure, yung mga molecules na to called matrix M, which I believe is derived from plants that serves as, and these serve as adjuvants or pampadagdag na stimulation ng immune system para mas bongga yung response natin against the vaccine antigen, the target antigen. So far, overall vaccine efficacy against developing moderate to severe COVID-19 is about 89.3, although details of these interim phase 3 trials has not been published yet. Novavax has recently gained attention in the news because it showed relatively good protection against the UK and the South Africa variant of SARS-CoV-2, and we will talk more about this later. The company has applied for emergency use approval in the EU, US, UK, and Canada, pero pending pa to kasi nga I think early this week lang naman lumabas yung efficacy and safety data ng interim phase 3 clinical trial nila. Okay, so now let's go to the virus vector vaccines like the ones from AstraZeneca, Gamaleya, and Johnson & Johnson. And probably the simplest way to describe this kind of vaccine is para siyang hybrid ng attenuated or pinahinang virus vaccine and a subunit vaccine. But I guess strictly speaking, it is really not. So maybe that's a bad way of describing it. But for these vaccines, meron kang harmless virus that you use as a vector, and then you insert the gene of your vaccine target, which is the spike protein gene sa case ng SARS-CoV-2. You insert that gene into the virus vector, and that harmless virus vector that is actually usually replication defective is the one that is injected into the body. once nasa katawan na yung virus vector, the portion of the genetic code of the vector will be transcribed and translated. Okay, these are technical terms, but just ignore these technical terms. Basta ang ending, yung spike protein ni SARS-CoV-2 ay magpuproduce sa loob ng katawan for our immune system to respond and generate memory. Now, adenoviruses are excellent vectors for delivering genes or vaccine antigens to the target host tissues. So, ito yung isa sa paboritong virus vector ng mga experts, not just for vaccines actually, but also for gene therapy. So, for AstraZeneca, they used a chimpanzee adenovirus as vector. For Gamaleya naman, they used two weakened version ng human adenoviruses AD26 and AD5. So different adenovirus vector for each shot. This is in an effort to optimize response. And then Johnson & Johnson naman used a similar human adenovirus vector, AD26 din, pero single shot lang. And this is quite important because if you can get good protective immunity after primary vaccination, then makakatipid ang mundo kung hindi na kailangan ng booster shot. So, although buhay ang adenovirus na ituturok sa katawan, these adenovirus vectors are replication defective, meaning wala siyang kakayahan na magparami sa katawan. So, if you are concerned about the safety of using live viruses as vectors like adenovirus, these vectors cannot replicate. So I guess less concern pagdating sa safety. Anyway, in terms of efficacy, AstraZeneca reported 62.1 to 90% protection. Depende kung anong dosing regimen yung gagamitin. Either yung parehong standard dose for both shots or low dose muna sa first shot and then standard dose sa booster shot. Now, these results were a bit controversial because the clinical trial was actually not designed that way. Meron na nagkamali sa dosing calculation, I guess, but I guess they can consider this a fortuitous accident kasi mukhang turns out mas maganda pala yung protection ng half dose muna and half dose muna yung primary vaccination. But it requires, I guess this requires further investigation just to be sure. And I know yung low dose standard dose scheme, it sounds counterintuitive kasi paano maging mas okay yung bakuna with a lower dose as a primary vaccination shot, diba? But actually, there are several possible scientific explanations for it, but we don't really have to go into that discussion here. What we need to remember, though, is that regardless of the dosage, regardless of the dosage scheme, protection is still more than 50%. 62% it may not be high, but it is good enough as it satisfies the minimal efficacy requirement for vaccines to be approved. And of course, relatively lower protection is always better than zero protection. So that's something you also have to consider. So Gamaleya has high protection against symptomatic COVID at 91.6. So maganda siya. But their clinical trial was only done in Moscow, in Russia. So it may not be representative enough of the global genetic variability. Although I think parang meron naman participants from non-white ethnicities din sa trial nila. But still, hindi siya ganun ka well representative. Tama ba? Yun. So, Johnson & Johnson reported 66 efficacy against moderate to severe COVID after a single-dose vaccination. Now, take note na yung count nila is protection from moderate to severe. Hindi kasali yung mild clinical diseases. Nevertheless, this is good news considering na single dose lang yung kailangan for the Johnson & Johnson bakuna. And I should point out that some of these vaccine companies are actually considering combining their vaccines. Ngayon, meron collaboration between Astra and Gamaleya, and they have an ongoing trial ng protection with using Gamaleya's human AD26 as the first shot, and then Astra's chimpanzee adenovirus vector as the booster shot. So hopefully this collaboration will result to a more effective and safer vaccine strategy against COVID. And I guess it is also not impossible na baka pati si Johnson & Johnson ay maki-join na rin sa collaboration na to with both or either companies. Results of Astra and Gamaleya's interim clinical data have been peer-reviewed or na-check na rin ng mga experts sa vaccines. But Johnson & Johnson's claim is currently only based on their press release kasi nga early this week lang to na-release yung data, but hopefully ma-publish naman soon. Now, Astra has been approved for emergency use in many countries. Although mga April pa raw siya i-approve sa US, and this is mainly because of this weird dosing scheme ng Astra. Then Gamaleya naman has emergency approval in Russia, Argentina, and Belarus, while J&J, since bagong labas pa nga lang yung data nila, pending pang application nito sa US. But I think their application for clinical trial in Pinas has already been approved. And I think magsa-start na yung trial nila sa Pinas soon, meaning magkaka-access na sa J&J bakuna yung mga magvo-volunteer as late-stage trial participants na Pinoys. And this is for a single-dose vaccination. Now, I am not sure if there is already a licensed adenovirus vector vaccine sa mundo. Mukhang wala pa. But there is a US FDA-approved adenovirus vector-based gene therapy for treating, I think it's inherited blindness. I can't remember the name of this gene therapy, but this was approved sometime in late 2017. So kahit papano, meron namang indirect evidence to show the long-term safety ng adenovirus vector sa katawan ng tao. Of course, this is not bakuna, this is for gene therapy, but still, meron konting proof na okay naman siya. Yun na yung gusto kong sabihin. Now, punta naman tayo sa pinakapaboritong COVID-19 bakuna ng marami, the modified mRNA vaccines from Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna. And I don't know if you know this, but mRNA carries the genetic code. Well, it's not only that, DNA also carries it too, but mRNA lang tayo. Mag-focus lang tayo sa mRNA for now. So mRNA carries genetic code. So they have the ability to instruct the cellular machinery to produce specific proteins based sa sequence na meron siya. These next generation vaccines are basically naked modified mRNA encoding still the SARS-CoV-2 spike glycoprotein that are produced either by in vitro synthesis, the in vitro transcription, or by chemical synthesis, with certain modification to make the mRNA more stable and slightly less immunogenic to avoid toxicity. And then these naked modified mRNA are then encapsulated into lipid nanoparticles and are then delivered into the body during vaccination. So once inside the body, they can instruct the cells to produce the spike protein na siyang makikita ng immune system natin at magti-trigger ng response, hopefully a memory response. So of all the COVID-19 vaccines available with published or with available efficacy data so far, the modified mRNA vaccines showed the highest protection against symptomatic COVID based on phase 3 interim trial data at 95 and 94.5% efficacy for Pfizer BioNTech and Moderna, respectively. So basically comparable yung protection for these two companies. Their trial data have been published in New England Journal of Medicine. So again, peer-reviewed na siya in a good journal. But while these mRNA vaccines are highly protective, the unstable nature of mRNA made their storage a bit challenging kasi kailangan super lamig. Unlike other vaccines na pwede na yung refrigerated condition at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius, Pfizer BioNTech requires storage at minus 70 degrees, meaning during transport or anytime, kailangan forever siyang naka-dry ice. And for storage naman, need yung mga minus 70 degrees biofreezers na bukod sa mahal i-purchase yung unit, magastos din siya sa kuryente. And also, delikado din pag nagka-power shortage. So, kailangan meron din siyang bonggang generator na backup para uninterrupted yung power supply ng biofreezers na yon. Otherwise, pag nagka brownout or blackout sa area, then pwedeng mapanis or I'm calling it panis, but really masira yung Pfizer na vaccine. And for these mRNA vaccines, as I've said, is very unstable and madali siyang ma-degrade. So once na subject mo siya sa warm temperature, then probably hindi mo na siya magagamit kasi it won't be immunogenic anymore. Moderna's storage requirement is a bit better kasi pwede siya at minus 2 degrees. So, okay na yung normal na freezers. The good thing is Moderna claims that their vaccine can even last up to a month sa fridge condition at 2 to 8 degrees for up to 30 days. And they said it can even last for about 12 hours at room temperature. But of course, this room temperature being US room temperature, which is about 25 degrees. And I don't know how this would translate sa Pinas condition with average temperatures ranging from maybe 21 degrees sa Baguio siguro, and perhaps mga 32 degrees sa other areas like Tugigaraw. No, maybe 32 degrees, maybe that's I think that's the average temperature for many areas in the country. And pero maybe like sa areas like Tugigaraw na I think pwedeng umabot yung temperature doon ng 39 degrees Celsius. So, yun, something to consider. Parang hindi mo, wag mong, I hope hindi isipin ng mga health personnel natin na just because Moderna is okay at room temperature for up to 12 hours, pwede na rin siya sa room temperature ng Pilipinas, because the room temperature here is 25 degrees. So something lang na we should be careful with. But yes, kung fridge conditions, kaya siya for up to 30 days. But still, for longer shelf life, better pa rin na i-store siya sa freezer condition, and it can last up to 6 months. Yan. So, I guess, so in terms naman ng emergency use approval, since these modified mRNA vaccines were the first ones to release their efficacy data, isa sila sa mga naunang na-approve for emergency use. So ngayon, so far, approved na siya sa maraming countries. So like US, UK, EU, Singapore, actually Philippines also for Pfizer, and Moderna, same. Yung mga basta mas maraming countries na na-approve na yung modified mRNA vaccines. Okay, so maybe I'll stop the first part of the talk right here, para lang meron namang break, and then maybe resume after like 5 minutes, or maybe I can just we can have like a mini question and answer portion sa part na to, just in case meron kayong tanong, or I can also just continue kung gusto niyo. Depende sa inyo. Yan.